saying, I would appreciate if you have comments to make, to take them out of the room and to keep comments in the room to a minimum. Welcome to this joint hearing of the Senate Education Committee and the Assembly Higher Education Committee on UC and CSU policies, procedures, and responses, the campus police, and on-campus demonstration. So the first question I'm going to kind of begin right now is, why are we here? Well, we're here in response to a number of recent and disturbing events which have been documented on national and international news reports and on various YouTubes and internet websites. Selected videos depicting these events are posted on my website and also available on the Senate Education Committee website. Both of these can be accessed at the Senate website, www.sen.ca.gov. And so instead of, we have a full committee hearing. If anybody wants to look at any of these selected videos depicting it, just go to the websites. These events include the pepper spraying of student protesters at UC Davis, the use of batons on protesters at UC Berkeley, and the pepper spraying of protesters and destruction of property by protesters at a recent CSU Board of Trustees meeting. These images were very disturbing, disappointing, and, as we all know, shocking to not only to us in California, but to the nation. Something is wrong with the system when our children and our students, struggling peacefully to have their voices heard, are answered by the spray of chemical weapons and the sting of a baton. Californians' constitutional right to peaceful assembly must be ensured. At the same time, we also have a responsibility to ensure the public safety on our campuses. California is in the midst of an economic crisis, and our citizenry is understandably frustrated. Our legislative analyst's office forecasts revenues below what we assumed in this last budget cycle, which means that the triggers provided for us in the 2011 and 2012 budget have been activated, which will result in an additional up to $2 billion in cuts this year. Unfortunately, we have very few easy options for balancing California's budget. Without additional revenues, and I state that again, without additional revenues to help address these shortfalls, we can expect that the frustration that our students and that our campus communities feel about funding for higher education will only be exacerbated. And we can expect and should hear the voices of our students and campus communities in protest, expressing their concern and discontent. In light of this inevitability, it's imperative that the system-wide and campus leaders be clear and swift in developing and articulating an informed and unified policy on the appropriate responses to peaceful campus protests and on the use of force by campus police. So that's why we're here. Now, what do we expect to learn today? There are a number of issues of statewide concern that have been raised by these issues that I've just mentioned. One, there are concerns about the role and responsibility of university, system-wide, and campus leaders in ensuring clear, consistent, and responsive policies and practices on the use of force, and the procedures for ensuring that students and campus communities may peacefully protest. These are the issues that this committee should focus upon today. How do the existing policies need to be reworked so that the shocking images we've seen in the last month do not reoccur? What specific activity have our university and campus leaderships engaged in to ensure that there is accountability for the recent actions on their campuses and that any necessary and rectifying actions will be taken? Second, there are concerns about the involvement and the actions of the campus police. Today we may hear about criminal investigations that have been undertaken, but let me be clear about one thing. We are not here to investigate or to declare whether criminal activity has occurred. that is outside the purview of this committee and will be examined and appropriately determined by the DA's office in Yolo County and/or by the Attorney General. Finally, the third one, there are concerns about general policies on police actions and the use of force and whether or not specific agents such as pepper spray should be used at all. Later on, we have asked, and he has also asked us, and we have agreed with that Senator Hayden will be addressing this issue. While not on the agenda, he will be invited to speak first during the public comment period. These are very important issues that will be raised by Senator Hayden, but these questions about public safety, while legitimate and worthy of examination, are outside of the overall purview of this committee. I would encourage those who want to engage in these policy discussions after this has been raised in this in the hearing by Senator Hayden, to work with the Public Safety Committee as they are the more appropriate body to review these questions. I personally will recommend to the Senate Chair, Senator Hancock, and to Assembly Member Amiano that they hold a hearing on this issue. But that is not going to be the focus of this. We will raise that issue, but it is not the focus of this committee hearing. Today we have 4 panels, and I'll just briefly describe them and ask Assembly Member Block to have. Our first panel will include the ACLU, an expert in civilian oversight of law enforcement, and an experienced campus police chief. That's 3 persons. This panel will address the legal bounds of free speech, appropriate use of force by law enforcement, the standards, procedures, and training necessary for purposes of crowd management, and the unique considerations of law enforcement on a university campus. Our second panel will include system representatives of both the UC and the CSU, who will discuss system-wide policies, procedures, training, and responses, and whether and how these are being examined and may change as a result of these recent events. Our third panel will include the campus leaders from UC Davis and CSU, and from UC Davis and CSU Fresno. They will talk about the implementation of these standards, policies, and procedures at the campus level and the types of review and changes under consideration. And our final panel will include the UC and CSU student associations, who will share with us some of their thoughts and perspectives on campus demonstration. And then we will go to public comment, and I very much appreciate and look forward to the hearing of the comments of all those that are here. As I mentioned, Senator Hayden will be the first person to present in that. And with that, I would like to ask my co-chair, Assemblymember Block, to make some opening statements. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator Lowenthal. Hello and good morning to everybody. I want to echo the welcome comments from my co-chair, and I want to thank the Senate Education Committee for your collaboration in convening today's hearing. While the focus of the hearing is policies and procedures surrounding student demonstrations, I want to take a moment to recognize the elephant in the room, and that is that many of the decisions that have students and others in higher ed institutions around the state upset emanate from this room, this building. Budget cuts have been horrible, and frankly, we are only dealing with the resources that the taxpayers of California give us. And as you all know, Governor Brown has now suggested increasing revenues, and it is my hope, and I'm sure the hope of several on the panel, that we will have greater amount of resources to distribute to important programs, especially including higher education. I think higher ed has borne enough of the burden already. It's been, a hectic month for many of us since the incident and the videotape of what happened at UC Davis. We know that's not the only incident around the state. We saw a disruption at the CSU Board of Trustees meeting. We saw an incident at UC Berkeley. Nobody has more respect, and I think I speak for many, if not all, the members of this committee, more respect for the tough job police do every day than we do. They lay their life on the lines for us, and we need them to do their job and to do their job well. I think one reason the 15-second UC Davis video was so shocking and seemed so outrageous is because we're not used to police not being disciplined. We're not used to police who don't show restraint, particularly on our college campuses. Our campus police are especially good community citizens. It seemed in the 15-second video that we saw that there was a lack of restraint. There is, by the way, a longer video, a video that goes about 15 minutes and provides some context for what went on during the 15 seconds that went viral worldwide. The 15-minute video does show students being provocative, but we'll talk more today about whether that kind of provocation is enough to allow this type of force in the face of people peacefully demonstrating. The longer video is available on my Twitter account, maybe also on the Senate website, just at MartyBlock78. If you Google that, you will find the full 15-minute video without any kind of editorial or commentary. Other investigations, as Senator Lowenthal said, will be evaluating individual conduct on that day and at the other sites around the state where there have been confrontations. And I applaud UC President Yudof for quickly acting to set up panels, task forces to look at both individual behavior and the context in the current day campus climate. That's not our job, as Senator Lowenthal said. Today we're looking at three things, basically. We're really trying to find out exactly what did go on that day above and beyond the 15-second or 15-minute video. Secondly, why did it happen? What forces created a climate where things seem to be a bit out of control? And third, what type of actions by the administration, ultimately by legislature, by the system, by campus police, by campus administrators, what types of actions might prevent this situation from happening again? Outcomes, I'm expecting we may find that there is a legislative fix for some of what happened, whether it's more funding for training, whether it's more consistent and clear procedures, whether we need, in some cases, stronger administrative leadership, whether there should be system-wide versus campus-based policies. The CSU seems to have more system-wide emphasis. UC seems to have more campus-based emphasis. We'll hear more about that today. Ultimately, the courts are going to decide the issue of excessive force. There is a case very much on point out of Humboldt County, and we'll hear about that today from, I think, our first panel. And we'll hear how the courts have defined excessive force, because it is, in fact, ultimately in their bailiwick. And we'll hear from students. And I'm looking forward to hearing from UC and CSU students in terms of their perspective on what happened that day, but also on the campus climate in general, what we may be looking forward to in the spring and next year. I served, a lot of you know, 26 years at San Diego State University. Much of that time, I was director of an office called the Center for Student Rights and Responsibilities. Part of my responsibility in that role was to be a liaison between police and students when there were demonstrations. We didn't see in the video administrative mediation in the situation at UC Davis. We'll want to talk a little bit about that and what might have been the reason. What we're going to do today, and I want to introduce my colleagues who are here, is take a look at particularly systemic problems that may have allowed what happened to happen, and we're going to look at how we might prevent problems from occurring in the future. That's what the legislature does, knowing full well that the root of all of this is, frankly, underfunding of higher education, underfunding of campus police, underfunding of our faculty, and we're hopefully in the next year going to explore ways to increase that funding. With us today on the Assembly side, and Senator will introduce the Senate side, we have Assembly members Brownlee, Yamada, Fong, Skinner, and Portantino, and also Assemblymember Olson. And I welcome you all today, and we'll be asking you to make brief comments after the senators have a chance to make comments if they wish to. And Senator Lowenthal, could you introduce your senators?
Certainly. I'm pleased that Senator Price and Senator Huff have joined us. today. With that, would anyone else like to make an opening statement, or Assemblymember Skinner?
Thank you, Senator Lowenthal and Assemblymember Block, for convening this and giving us the opportunity to make just brief comment. I represent AD 14 is also the home of UC Berkeley, and in addition to my being the representative of UC Berkeley, I was both a student and a staff person there for well, long time. Can't remember all the years. Anyway, and a participant in many, many, many campus demonstrations. I, of course, like everyone, was very dismayed to see not only the activity of the UC Berkeley police and the use of the batons, and I'm not going to recall the exact date, in November on in trying to remove tents, but also the pepper spray incident in Davis. But I wanted, in my comments, I wanted to highlight a couple of things that I'm interested in. One is whether, or the issue of police protocol, not just for our campus, but since our campus police are not insular, our UC police departments and our CSU police departments are part of the larger public safety community statewide. They're trained by the Post Institute. They have, there are rules and procedures that go beyond just the campus alone. And is there fixes that need to be made statewide in police procedures and in post training and such? The governor wrote a letter to the Post Institute, which is in our packet, basically asking Post to look at this. And I raise that because while on the UC Davis campus the incident was UC police, the incident on campus, on Berkeley campus, included other mutual aid forces. And any one of our campuses can, in circumstances where there's incidents like this, call in mutual aid. And so we, obviously the issue of how our police protocols and practices are statewide influence this. Additionally, I wonder if there's any factor regarding the calling of mutual aid. And do our forces, can they adequately, now I'm talking about our UC forces, when they call in mutual aid, certainly my understanding of mutual aid is that whatever the force is that called it in is the commanding, is the operative, so in other words, the other jurisdictions that join in that call do have to follow the command officer of the force that called it. So, and in the case of UC Berkeley on that date, November 19th, was it?
November 18th.
November 18th?
No, that was Davis.
Okay, sorry. In the UC Berkeley incident, they called mutual aid. So were the other forces that came in, Alameda County sheriffs and others, did they follow UC Berkeley's protocol, or was it an issue of a problem within the mutual aid context? The other issue that is whether other jurisdictions' actions within, not on campus, but for example, in Oakland, we saw in response to one of the Occupy protests, some very serious, what some of us would consider excessive uses of force. Is the tone of other jurisdictions perhaps using what some people would consider excessive uses of force affecting the law enforcement community overall? So I think these are very important ones for us to consider, and while this is not the Public Safety Committee, it is higher ed, I think these things do bear on how our campus police forces act. And lastly, I just wanted to state, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk later, that what in addition to the actual actions and the pain and suffering that the people who were either pepper sprayed or batoned, I think that it is very, we need to put a halt to this kind of reaction to nonviolent, passive civil disobedience, because I don't think that our campuses, our police forces, or the state in general are about trying to repress or intimidate a long-standing pillar of our democracy and our Constitution, which is the right to engage in nonviolent civil disobedience.
Assemblymember Portantino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Chair. I'm here for two reasons. One, as a legislator who sits on the Higher Ed Committee, but also as the father of a UC student who I often encourage to get involved on campus. And when she texts me and lets me know she's going to an activity, I usually text her back, that I'm proud of her for getting involved. And I want to follow up on the sentiments of Ms. Skinner. That's what we as parents do. We encourage our kids to be active and to become activists. And oftentimes we say that the role of the activist is to make us as policymakers do better. And so I want to make sure that, those students who are being active are able to do it in a safe and, as been commented, long traditional manner, and that we don't send a mixed message to our children that if they do become activists, they're going to be pepper sprayed. I think this hearing is completely and totally appropriate to try to figure out how do we move forward and how do we improve on the current process. I think Assemblymember Block's comments about getting to the systemic issues of what this state feels about higher education. I mean, there is unrest out there. There is unrest out there because of the severe budget cuts. Frankly, higher education should be a bigger priority of the state legislature, and we should be working in concert to find dedicated revenue streams to make sure that we provide the same opportunity today that we did 20 and 30 years ago. So I know that tensions are high from all sides of this equation, but we have to try to figure out the best way to make sure that our students who exercise their rights are protected, and then the campuses are well equipped to deal with all of the issues and well equipped to make sure that those same students have the best opportunity to be educated as their predecessors did 30 years ago. So I think this is a very appropriate committee hearing. I appreciate the Senate for convening and Mr. Block for jointly doing it, because there's a lot of good questions that need to be asked. But at the end of the day, our students need to come first, and they need to be provided with an opportunity to be educated in a safe manner, and I think encouraged to be next generation of activists.
Thank you. Assemblymember Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While I am very concerned about what happened at UC Davis, and I'm interested in learning more about what happened and why it happened and how perhaps things like that could be prevented in the future, I wanted to make a comment that I think it would be a mistake to assume that a single incident demonstrates how conflicts are handled system-wide, both in the UC and CSU. My job prior to being elected to the State Assembly, I was an administrator at CSU Stanislaus, ran the Office of Communications and Public Affairs, and part of my job was to work very closely with campus police on critical incidents and demonstrations, and they consistently stated, and I learned from them time and time again, but they consistently stated that their job was as much to protect the protesters as it was to protect everyone else. And they viewed that as a very important role in their job, and to ensure peaceful protests. So mistakes happen, mistakes are unfortunate, but I just wanted to make that comment because I do think it would be a short-sighted mistake, and I would hope all of us would believe that a single incident doesn't necessarily speak to how conflicts are handled system-wide in either the UC or CSU system. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I look forward to hearing your comments.
Senator Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to applaud both chairs in bringing forward this discussion. Certainly one that's very timely, given the items in the press. I had a chance to participate in student demonstrations during the late 60s at San Francisco State. Some of you may recall the SI Hayakawa days, on strike, shut it down. And I certainly would have hoped that we would learn some lessons from those early days, from those days of demonstrations. So clearly the intersection of free speech and campus security, something that's very important. I think the dialogue here will be important as we try to identify how we can be more responsive and responsible. And so I look forward to the comments and for the conclusions that we're able to draw from today's activities.
Thank you. And then finally, Assemblymember Yamada.
Thank you very much, Senator
No, not
Lowenthal.
finally, then Assemblymember Fong follows.
I just wanted to thank you both again for convening this hearing. I'm Assemblymember Mariko Yamada. I have the privilege of representing UC Davis and also live in the community of Davis. I know we're all anxious to hear the testimony, but my comments this morning, I want to say that I think you laid out the roadmap and the scope of our deliberations today, and that I think as we see all of the multiple investigations that are coming forward, that something positive will come out of this as we try to achieve a balance between our constitutional rights of free speech and assembly and public safety. And it is a volatile time. It's far from over, and as we continue to struggle over the next several months with this very daunting budget situation, I hope that we will take some lessons from all of this. And I look forward to some positive change and outcome going forward. Thank you.
Assemblymember Fong.
I wanted to thank both of you for calling this hearing, and I want to thank the Pro Tem Steinberg and Speaker Perez for facilitating this hearing as well. As a member of the Assembly Committee on Higher Education, a former community college trustee, a community college professor, and a proud parent of 2 UC graduates and a current CSU student, I was appalled by the unjustifiable excessive use of force on a peaceful demonstration of college students by campus police departments. As many of you know, nonviolent civil disobedience is part of the very essence of our democracy. In order to create political will to create social change, the incidents on our college campuses should serve as a reminder that one of our core foundations of our Constitution, the right to assemble and speak freely, should never be taken for granted. I'd like to commend our college students throughout our institutions for the courageous and symbolic stand that they have taken throughout our campuses in order to protect higher education. As a state legislature, I'm committed to protecting higher education to advance the educational and professional goals of our students so they can ensure a prosperous future for themselves in California. My expectation from this hearing is to listen to testimony from participants of the current policies and procedures of our institutions related to student protests and civil disobedience, and whether we should consider altering them in order to curtail excessive police force on peaceful protesters. The primary goal of each of our institutions is to ensure a quality level of education for our students. The secondary goal is not only to maintain the safety of our college students from other students and outsiders, but also from our campus police departments. Due to the international attention these incidents have received, people are watching and paying attention to what California will do in order to prevent future incidents. So thank you for taking the lead on this issue, and I look forward to hearing everyone's testimony and participation.
Thank you. And with that, thank you, Assemblymember Brownlee and Senator Huff, for allowing us to finally move on to our panel, which is fine. I think that we have really framed, the legislators here, what the issues are and what's important to them. So I did not mean that that was not important. But it is, we are really here to hear the panelists. And our first panel will be on the use of force, policies, procedures, and responses. We're going to invite up Michael Risher, attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union, Barbara Attard, who from police practices consultant from the organization Accountability Associates, and formerly San Jose Independent Police Auditor and Chief Investigator for the Berkeley Police Review Commission, and President of the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, and also Calvin Handy, a consultant who was the Chief of Police Emeritus from the University of California, Davis. As they come up, I just want to let those that are watching, we've asked this panel to really address 3 issues, and I'm going to lay out what those issues are. What are the standards, policies, training that govern the use of force by law enforcement entities? So, what are the bounds of legal free speech? What is an appropriate police response to nonviolent but potentially illegal activity? And 3, are there best practices for addressing nonviolent campus demonstrations? That's what the framework that we asked them to start with. With that, panelists, we'd like to keep it so that we can move on, not too long. So the first, introduce yourself. Among the panel, you can choose who goes first.
Am I going first?
Yes.
My name is Michael Risher. I am a staff attorney with the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union of California. And much of what I'm going to say shows that many of the opening statements reflect not only Californian values and your values, but values that the Constitution demands: free speech, the right to be free from excessive force. The use of excessive force against people engaged in political speech, demonstrators, protesters, threatens some of our most basic and fundamental constitutional values: the right to speak, the right to assemble, and the right to petition the government for the redress of grievances, both because it punishes people for exercising those rights, and perhaps more importantly, because it may intimidate others who would like to come and speak out, but are scared that if they do so, they'll be subject not just to arrest, but to the excessive use of force. They may be blinded by chemicals, beaten with batons, shocked by tasers. That is intolerable, and this threat is particularly acute when we're talking about speech on the campuses of our great California public universities. As I heard many members say, we send our young people to universities so that they will engage in public policy debates, so that they will engage with the important questions of our day. They should not be punished for doing so. They should not be threatened with these caustic substances for doing so. The right to freedom of speech and assembly and to petition is protected by the First Amendment, by the California Constitution. It protects a broad range of expressive activities, not just speaking, but also demonstrating, protesting, and yes, saying provocative things to the police and to others. Controversy is an important part of our constitutional system of democracy. Of course, the right to expressive conduct is not absolute, and the government has the authority to impose laws to preserve public health and safety. People who violate these laws during protests may be subject, engage in civil disobedience, may be subject to arrest. They must not be subject to the use of excessive force, and I'll talk in a moment what's excessive. Because, as I said, that punishes them for speaking out without any sort of trial, and it also, more importantly, may intimidate people. People may feel threatened. They don't want to come to a protest if they might be blinded by pepper spray. That's reasonable. We cannot have people silenced by the use of excessive force. This, of course, raises the question, what is excessive? And here we look to the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and also the California Constitution's Article 1, Section 13, both of which prohibit unreasonable seizures of the person by the police. When a police officer arrests somebody using excessive force, that is an unreasonable seizure. Excessive force is unreasonable force. And as you mentioned, we have had cases that look at this. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has developed a list of factors that it examines in just this sort of circumstance where police officers are using not lethal force, they're not shooting people with actual bullets, but using less lethal force. Pepper spray, so-called bean bags, which aren't full with beans, they're full with lead shot. Tasers, batons. In those situations, the Ninth Circuit has developed a test and looks and says the most important factor that says whether the police can constitutionally use that type of intermediate level of force is whether the person that they're subduing presents a threat to the safety of the officer or to some other person. The other important factors are whether that person has committed some serious crime, a felony as opposed to a misdemeanor such as a trespass or simply obstructing an officer, and whether that person poses a threat of escape, whether the person might flee if the officers don't use force to prevent that person from fleeing. In the Headwaters case, about 10 years ago, the Ninth Circuit examined the use of pepper spray against protesters who had gone into private offices, a congressman's office also, had chained themselves together and were refusing to leave. The response of the local law enforcement was to come up and spray them at close range with pepper spray, just as we see on the videotapes from Davis. And the Ninth Circuit, in no uncertain terms, said that that could be excessive force under the Constitution. Seated protesters do not pose a risk to anyone's health or safety. They haven't committed serious crimes. We're not talking robbers or murderers. We're talking about people who may be committing civil disobedience in exercise of their rights. And they do not pose a risk of flight. They're sitting there. That's the whole problem. The case was returned for trial, and the jury of Californians decided, yes, that was excessive force, using pepper spray shot in the eyes of peaceful protesters who were simply seated and refusing to leave. So,
I would like you just to summarize. What we'd like to do is to have each of the panelists talk for 5 or so minutes, not much more, and
Right.
then have the members of the committee engage in about 15 minutes of questions for all, which will give us about a half an hour per panel so that we can finish up at a reasonable time. So if you could just kind of conclude.
So the question becomes, what do we do?
Yes.
And I think there's several things. First of all, training is important. Officers need to know what is and is not allowed under the law and as matters of policy. I think equally important is civilian review. Berkeley has civilian review. The other UC campuses do not. That civilian review ideally would include students, faculty, other members of the community, and it would be transparent. Transparency is a problem after the California Supreme Court's decision in Copley Press. That's a problem that this legislature can deal with. And finally, I think we need to remember that although these videos shocked the world, police officers interact with students and other people in our state every day, and we can't lose sight of the fact that what this legislature does in response to what it saw in these videos will also affect the rights of many other Californians who are expressing their First Amendment rights or simply their rights to go about their business. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next panelist, Barbara.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Senator Lowenthal and Assemblymember Block and members of the committee. It's an honor to speak with you here today. I'm Barbara Attard. I'm a practitioner of civilian oversight, having worked in San Francisco, Berkeley, and San Jose. What I did in that field was review misconduct investigations and weighed in on policies and procedures. I started working in San Francisco in 1983, and at that time, the Office of Citizen Complaints had the opportunity to weigh in on demonstration issues for the 1984 Democratic National Convention. At that time, we recommended that the officers have 2-inch badge numbers on their helmets, which went a long way toward accountability by the OCC and SFPD. Crowd control policies have been developed for San Francisco by the ACLU, OCC, and many community groups. Because there were demonstrations often in San Francisco over AIDS issues and many issues, San Francisco trains officers constantly on crowd control. They teach officers to facilitate demonstrations. Their general order states a primary mission of police at events involving free speech activity is to protect and respect First Amendment rights to freedom of expression and assembly. Reviewing the many clips of demonstrations, not only on college campuses but in other jurisdictions, it appears that officers have become a bit out of practice in dealing with demonstrations. I've been asked by members of the media, and I expect a question that you will be dealing with is whether crowd control and use of force policies should be different for college campuses than for police departments. The answer is no. Policing must be constitutionally based. Standards are set for all officers, and officers must be well versed in the policies and the standards. There are some basic issues that have arisen on UC campuses involving demonstrations that should be addressed. Good crowd control and use of force policies must be in place. The crowd control and demonstration policies should be reviewed to ensure that they're in line with the law and the standards of the community that they serve. A statewide standard would make a lot of sense, I think. There should be regular training in crowd control and civil disobedience and use of force tactics. While there haven't been regular demonstrations in recent years, departments should ensure that their officers are well versed in the policies and that they have regular training on the policies to include reading dispersal orders, tactical fundamentals, and First Amendment rights issues. There needs to be ample staffing and clear policies for mutual aid, particularly at the November 18th UC Davis demonstration. It appeared clear that there were not enough officers to take action that day. The demonstrators encircled the officers, and this should not have happened. Officers need to be trained to know when they have enough officers to take action, and the police and university leadership needs to ensure that there are enough officers in place to take action before action is taken. As addressed by Assemblymember Skinner earlier, there must be clearer lines of authority and direction in mutual aid situations. Who is in charge? What are the policies that are in place? And how will orders be conveyed? And as my other speaker here said, there's a real need for oversight. Civilian oversight of police has become a part of government throughout the United States. There's a national association that provides an annual conference. It's NACOL, the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. Oversight provides a way for people to have a voice in how policing happens in their communities. There have been many issues in the news in the last year or two regarding policing of college campuses. Issues of force regarding the Occupy demonstrations, but also issues of sexual assaults not being reported in Seattle and State College, Pennsylvania, as well as unfair advantages given to athletes who have broken the law. Policing on college campuses is in large part a separate, closed system without effective oversight. UC Berkeley is the only campus that I am aware of that has an oversight body in place, but they only have the authority to review appeals of misconduct investigations. There should be a statewide mandate for oversight bodies at all campuses with ample authority, staffing, and effective reporting requirements. While police misconduct is shielded from public inspection due to legal restraints, California Penal Code 832.7, the Police Officers' Bill of Rights, and the Copley Press versus County of San Diego decision, there is much that can and would benefit from review by an oversight body. Oversight bodies can investigate complaints or review them to ensure they are fair and complete. The oversight bodies should ensure that policies are set and policing is conducted within the guidelines set by the community. And reports should be publicized. Numbers and issues can be made public, and that would be within the law. This is an opportunity to make significant improvements in policing on all of our college campuses. I applaud your interest and willingness to support the police departments, students, faculty, and leadership by instituting policies to ensure fair policing and ongoing oversight of campus law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Handy, Consultant Chief of Police Emeritus for the University of California, Davis.
Thank you very much. I am very pleased to be here today, and I must say that I am very encouraged to see from this very important committee that there is a willingness to wait, particularly concerning these multiple investigations that are taking place, and let's understand what those are going to be about and what actually happened here before we rush too quickly, I think, into removing and clearing up and clarifying this problem. I have 30 years experience as a law enforcement person, all of it on college campuses at UC Berkeley and UC Davis. I have also worked throughout my career on most of the campuses on one project or the other. And I can say from my many experiences in crowd control and crowd behavior disobedience, that what I've seen, this 15-minute clip of what happened at UC Davis, is an absolute and clear aberration to me from what will normally happen. The UC police departments, and I would like to provide a perspective, have been participating in the POST training program since the early 70s at the inception of POST. We hire our individuals through the POST regulations. We train them through POST regulations. Crowd control and crowd management has been a key part of these training programs, both in the basic academy and the field training programs and specific in-service training programs where crowd control is the issue. And, of course, the bottom line, the legal and constitutional issues that surround free speech and freedom of assembly. I think it goes without saying that from my experience, whether this is a written document that exists somewhere or not, policing and law enforcement on college campuses see ourselves as absolutely required to protect the rights of individuals who wish to exercise their freedom to dissent and their freedom to assemble. It is our absolute responsibility to support and protect those individuals to the best of our ability. And I believe in the pejorative sense, most of the time we try to achieve that. How is this balance achieved? In one instance, clearly from very highly specialized and intense training. We look to the Post Commission again because that is the source here in our state of where that information will come from. It allows us the opportunity to understand what the guidelines are, what the pitfalls are, constitutional applications, and of course the actual in-the-field execution of these situations that becomes very critical. In addition to the guidelines, in addition to the training, we have to have, I believe, a philosophical orientation about the use of force. For me, it is most, I think, clearly reflected in our contemporary times in the community-oriented policing notion that most of you have probably heard about. I personally believe, and I, as a police chief, I tried to practice as best I could the principles of Robert Peel, the 9 principles of which are the foundation of Western contemporary law enforcement. And first among those is that the people are the police, and the police are the people, and the people are the police. And I have always, as an individual, and also as a leader and a follower in law enforcement in our community, I have felt that this is the basis of why I want to be here. I am here to serve. I want to help people. In terms of the specific application of community-oriented policing, that means that the police mission must identify and be focused and related to the mission, in this particular instance, of our university system. The University of California Police Departments, for the most part, to the best of my knowledge, are trying to ensure that our operational missions are in sync and the spirit and the letter of the larger campus mission, which is to educate, to research, to serve, and to engage in patient care. The authority granted to the UC Police Department stems clearly from the Penal Code. At our inception in 1947, when we became legislatively a police department, we, under Penal Code sections 835A and 836, those are the basis in law for making a decision about the application of force. One of the biggest factors that applies here, I think, is discretion and judgment. There is a set of circumstances that applies to an individual solo officer cruising the streets or working his or her beat. But there is a different scenario that takes place when we get into collective decision-making, and that, I think, has a great effect on the issue of judgment. In the case of campuses, one of our hallmarks has been intense collaboration, intense cooperation, intense and imminent patience, and I think a very good ear to ensure that and coming from maybe a police officer, this may not be totally logical, but I think it is, in that we are looking for examples to also teach when students and others are exercising their principles. As one member of the committee has said, we do not want the response to be that they are going to be pepper sprayed. We want our responses to be reasonable, to be thought through, to be highly communicated, to be logical, to be heartfelt, and to be caring. University environments are very challenging. Our campuses are open. Anyone can approach, anyone can be there, anyone can come there for any reason. And to, I think, police an open campus situation, which is exactly what we want, there are difficulties that we have to face. And sometimes we're going to, I think, there is a possibility that we may make mistakes, but I think the record is clear that when you think of the many, many dozens of engagements in my own individual case that I've had in crowd control scenarios, I think for the most part, we've had a successful outcome. So I want to reinforce the notion that what should happen here, I think that in terms of some of the ideas that I see out there, the police, the UC police, and I think the CSU police as well, have never been represented on the post commission. The Post Commission cannot, effectively have everybody in California law enforcement on this commission, but I think that's a place where we ought to be represented and have the impact on the what happens in terms of this kind of training. The university campuses have lots and lots and lots of experience here, and I'll close by saying that in my experience, we have tried very hard to work with everyone. If you find a university police department, you're going to find our willingness to work very hard and very intensely with everyone. We're also willing to stand up and make corrections and adjustments in our programs, and we also want to ensure that, at the bottom line, that our campuses are safe communities for all the things that take place there, and I'm very pleased to be here today as a part of this.
Thank you very much, and thank you for providing us with written information with some of those specific recommendations. I'd like to kind of keep the questions to about 15 minutes so that we don't run very, very far behind. And I know some of the members have already asked some specific questions, so I'll let them ask those questions as we go. I'm just going to try to, I'll just ask one question and then any of the other members, and that is, in listening to this and trying to figure out where we go, it would be very helpful to me to understand, is there a balance, and what is that right balance between allowing law enforcement discretion, yet having clear standards and policies about how demonstrations and crowd management should be handled? How do you deal with, is there a gray line there by giving discretion to law enforcement, and yet to make sure that we have policies really clearly in terms of how crowd management should be handled? And I'll ask any of the members of the panel to kind of respond to that.
Well, I mentioned it in my prepared remarks that it is critically important to understand the law and the application of the law as instructed from our Constitution and our state Constitution as well as our national Constitution. And I believe it's also important to be in a scenario where our officers and our leaders can understand best practices in terms of specific crowd control situations. And there's a whole body of training and evidence about situations that have gone quite well and situations that have not. And somewhere we have to learn to take the lessons learned, the best practices from those, and apply them. With that also, as I mentioned, comes I think a philosophical orientation about what we believe about the constitutional use of force. And I think on the campuses, exceedingly so, we are always looking for the less than lethal or less, I think a reduction or a minimum use of force in every situation that we can, particularly with anyone, but I think clearly with students and those who have a right to be there. So I'd say there has to be a combination of constitutional understanding, specific knowledge and training from lessons learned, and then, of course, the philosophical the individual who's working in these situations.
Anybody else? Barbara.
Can I just also add that crowd control is typically a team kind of effort on the part of the police officers, and the authority needs to be from the top down. And individual officers don't typically have a lot of individual discretion in those situations. So it would be the sergeant or lieutenant who's giving the order to go forward when they should be using pepper spray or other kinds of things. But really, it needs to be a top-down kind of a decision made.
I agree, and I would add that particularly when we're talking about the First Amendment, discretion is very dangerous because there's the danger that an officer will react to what's being said rather than conduct that may pose a danger to health and to safety. And so in this area in particular, the rules should be very, very clear, and discretion should be limited to what's necessary to allow officers the flexibility they need. We helped Oakland write a crowd control policy that is very detailed. They say that it has been incredibly helpful for them to have this policy, and it doesn't contain a lot of discretion. It has very clear rules.
Thank you. Assemblyman Block.
Chief Handy, a couple of specific recommendations or ideas discussed by your other panelists included 2-inch badge numbers so that students, in the case of campus incidents, could clearly identify what officers might be involved in what conduct, and that might have play a role in minimizing inappropriate conduct. And also civilian review or oversight boards on college campuses. As a police chief with a long history, how do you feel about both of those? And in particular, do you feel legislation with regard to both of those ideas would be appropriate?
Well, let me take the latter, the issue of civilian review. I just completed the 3-year term at the City of Davis Police Advisory Committee. And this committee came to being out of a major problem that had taken place in the community. And we had 2 prongs of that process. One, there was an attorney who served as an ombudsperson and was the point of contact for anyone in the community who had an issue with the police or a complaint. And the second prong was myself and two other attorneys, and we served as a critical analysis team, and we looked at completed citizen reports, and we provided our own input to whether we thought they were sufficient, complete, and whole, and enough that we could rest that particular case. I think the combination of these 2 pieces worked quite well because in the one instance, the police associations and unions and others who are, they're going to be a little bit leery about someone that they perceive to be judging them maybe without the proper qualifications. And so they felt very, I think, at ease, if I can speak for them to a slight degree, about the process of the credentials and the qualifications of the people doing the analysis. And then they felt, of course, I think, good about the folks who were dealing with the ombudsperson piece. So I think there's a place for a role like that. And unfortunately, sometimes in reading about police review, there's a long history where sometimes these can be adversarial. And as long as we can keep the adversarialness out and the objectivity, I think it works. In terms of the ability to identify police officers in a crowd situation, any of those steps, like 2-inch badge numbers or having badges on your numbers on your helmet or on your chest plate or somewhere that you can be identified, is a good idea for the reason that is, first of all, officers are required to identify themselves by our state laws. But within a crowd control situation, that becomes much more difficult because of this unity of command, I think, implication. But I do think that is a good idea as well. And, of course, we may look to expand on those ideas if possible. As to legislation that may or may not support one or both of these, I think in the first instance, the ID, I think that may be properly covered. In the issue of police review boards as by legislation, I think that I think we have to be open to looking at that kind of scenario with the idea, if that should be the case, of ensuring that this is objective, it's fair for all involved.
Thank you, Chief.
Assemblymember Yamato.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for all this testimony. I had a couple of questions. I thought I heard Ms. Attard say that you believe that, you know, all of the police interactions should be consistent, whether it's campus-based or not. And then I thought I heard Mr. Handy, and hello, Calvin, it's good to see you here, that there are some unique aspects to campus policing. So how do we reconcile? I don't think those are necessarily conflicting, but your statements are a little bit different.
If I could just clarify, I said that the use of force and policies at demonstrations, they should be consistent whether it's a police department or a campus.
Okay.
Because it needs to be constitutionally based and within post guidelines.
Okay. Thank you.
And I agree with that.
Okay. And then a second question is probably more for Mr. Handy, and that is, I believe just using UC Davis as an example, it's a campus of approximately 60,000, including students, faculty, visitors, vendors, businesses, small businesses on campus. Is there a ratio of campus police to the population in much the same way as, you know, there would be a standard in any city, for example, or any community? Do we have a, you know, 3.4 officers per thousand? You know, I'm just throwing that figure out. I don't know what it is. Is there a standard for the number of officers required, considering that across our 10 UCs and, you know, our multiple CSU campuses, and for that matter, I know that community colleges are not part of this discussion, but, you know, there are 112 community colleges. If we're looking at campuses in somewhat of a unique way, is there a standard for the number of officers per thousand?
Well, I want to qualify that I'm not an expert on this area because that's a very complicated subject. But I think that there are, in fact, I know that there are equations and permutations that are used by police departments around the country, whether on a campus or not, to try to determine what the staffing levels should be in any given jurisdiction. And I can't say that there's complete uniformity across the board on what those should be, but the standards do exist. We, during my tenure at UC Davis, looked to the International Associations of Chiefs of Police and also the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators to work on those formulas and those equations to see if we could attain or reach some uniformity. Not sure that entirely happened, but there are equations and there is a standard for that kind of thinking process, indeed.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make one final comment on this, and that is, you know, what we have here compared to, you know, my era when, you know, I grew up during Kent State. We have the advent of social media, which really, you know, has changed all of our lives in ways that maybe we haven't even been able to measure. So how technology and going viral and just the ability for messages to be communicated so quickly, you know, I think has really affected this situation as well. So something to be mindful of as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to cut the questioning in 10 more minutes so that we can move on. Assemblymember Skinner.
Thank you, and thank you, panelists, for your testimony. Just a quick full disclosure. I was a grad student at UC Berkeley during the divestment movement and was also the key staff at the UC Berkeley Graduate Assembly, which is graduate student government. We were located in close proximity to Sproul Hall and took it upon ourselves to be the student moderators, at least, of the 180-day sit-in that occurred on the Sproul Plaza during that time. Now, my experience there does not mean I'm any expert on any of this. It only means that during that time, we tried to have a very close communication with the UC Berkeley Police Force, with the campus officials, and at least with the student protesters, but knowing anytime you have a 180-day type of activity like that, every day the people who are there are different. We were very fortunate during that time to have very few police incidents and very few incidents with the students. Whether that was unique or not, I don't know. But from that experience and from other observations, it seems to me that we would do well to have clear, as Mr. Tard indicated and Calvin, Mr. Handy, you reinforced, to have very comparable policies on use of force and what is expected, or crowd control and demonstrations on both campus and community. Partly because students demonstrate both places, partly because the police officers are not just in one locale, partly because campuses are interfaced with communities. And it seems to me the clearer the standard is, if there's not a double, if there's not one rule on the campus and another rule in the community, it's, I think, clearer for the police, clearer for the students. And I think also students could then be oriented that, you know, if they choose to participate in whatever kind of action, there are potential consequences. Now, I'm not talking about consequences such as being pepper sprayed. I'm more talking about consequences that there shouldn't be, that if I act X way in the community, then I'm going to have a different consequence than if I act this way on the campus premise. So I think that that kind of clarity would be enormously helpful. But my questions are, do we think that this is an issue of, Mr. Handy, you mentioned that there is quite extensive training. Do we think that the training, you know, are officers not getting enough of it? Does it need to be updated? And before you answer, I'm just going to ask a couple others. The other is crowd control. Obviously, campus police have to be good at crowd control. It's a natural and normal thing on campuses is crowd control. Depending on the department, other jurisdictions in our state, while they, yes, should be familiar with crowd control, they may not be called upon engaging in crowd control much. Clearly, if you're in Oakland, a San Francisco, and LA, or a Berkeley police officer, you deal with crowd control quite a lot. If you're the city of Albany, maybe you don't. So is there a different level of training that we need to offer depending on the department? And then finally, should pepper spray be on the persons of police officers in incidents like this?
To go back to the question of enough training for peace officers and the relative uniform application of that training.
Very short.
I think that there should be I don't know if there's enough training, but we need to have continuous intensive training at all times. I think on the issue of the different levels, whether you're on the campus or not on the campus, if you were serving as a peace officer in California, depending on circumstances, you could be serving in a jurisdiction anywhere. So for that reason alone, I would think that people should be relatively uniform in their training. The issue of pepper spray, most of the tools issued to police officers are defensive tools. And I think as long as they're used in that basic application, they are appropriate. I go back to the comment earlier. In crowd scenarios, there is a unity of command, so you would not expect an individual officer to exercise a discretion to be doing so. But I think it takes lots of control, lots of training, and clear, distinct policy. I also happened to be at Berkeley when you were there. In that scenario, we had people. It was like an ATM machine. People were calling up saying, we're the poets from so-and-so. We want to be arrested at 2 o'clock. We did that. No one was injured, and people had their dissent. But I think on campuses, we want to ensure that the peace is maintained.
Thank you. Senator Huff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For Chief Handy, you seem to be on the spot and the answer man right now. You talked about there needed to be a philosophical orientation about use of force. And philosophical isn't always translate into, I'm here, here's a situation. Can you explain that? I mean, where do you, it seems like there's some subjective assessment, and you did talk about you need some judgment in assessment tools as well on that. I mean, how do you help the guy in an unfolding situation know whether this is going to get out of control versus, these guys are just going to link hands and that's it?
Yes, I understand the question. My implication in regards to the philosophical orientation does not necessarily have an active role in a given civil disobedience or crowd management situation. I'm talking about the fundamental orientation of a peace officer, of a person who is serving members of his or her community in regards to their safety and their ability to do what it is that they want to do in their lives. So I'm talking about the best example of community-oriented policing is an absolute commitment to work in earnest and honest, I think, collaboration with the community in which you serve. That philosophical orientation is extremely important, because I think what stems from that then becomes the individual officer's perceptions about what is excessive force beyond the legal constraints in the law itself. And so I believe that we must work very hard, as we try to do on campuses, to ensure that we are connected to the communities we serve. That's the fundamental orientation. Then when you move that to a civil disobedience situation or a crowd control scenario, that becomes an implication, to be clear, but your true objective might be to move someone or not move them, or listen more attentively. But I believe that philosophically we must be connected to the people that we serve. In the urban settings around this country, many years you've heard people say, we feel the police are occupying forces in our communities. Why are they here? We don't connect to them. We don't understand who they are. So I believe in this community policing and the concepts of Mr. Robert Peel, where the police are the people and the people are the police. And that's a philosophical orientation that's extremely important, I think, particularly on campuses.
I think you mentioned you had like 35 years experience or something in your storied career. Can you cite examples of how you've achieved this communication, this proactive interaction, so you avoid incidents like this?
I'll make this very brief. We had a scenario in the late 90s at the UC Davis where there was a long history of students of color feeling that the police were profiling them and not understanding them and basically harassing them for no good reason. And so we initially entered into a whole series of forums and training sessions with the students, we meaning the UC Police, the City of Davis Police, and the student government, and of course student affairs. And over some time we started out with a theme for that program called the UC Police Brutality, and then that morphed into exploring the relationship between students and the police, because we spent the time and the energy and took the opportunities to work closely with our students, to listen to them, for them to listen to us, and to clarify and to demystify what our role is. So I think that went on to become an annual forum, and ultimately it was going to become more social activities, but just a commitment to be there for our students and to be a part of it. And I think the exploring the relationship was a great example of it. Of course, we had lots of help from the Multicultural Immersion Center so that we could understand how the dynamics of our society. But I think that that's one of the good examples for me personally.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Assemblymember Brownlee.
Thank you. Just a very quick follow-up to actually Ms. Skinner's line of questioning. I thought, Mr. Handy, heard you say that there is no UC or CSU representation with Post?
I believe that to be the case.
And do you think if there was representation that would be helpful, obviously with training, but with Nancy's questioning around alignment between standards in city policing versus campus policing?
I think the likelihood is that it would be beneficial to have that kind of connection. One clear example is what happened in 2003 with the Commission's guidelines on crowd control and crowd disorder. Two individuals from UC Davis at the time when I was there participated on that development committee. And I think we were there because we have lots to input in regard to crowd control in those situations. So, yeah, I think it is very helpful.
I would just like to ask one last question, but I only want a yes or a no, and I only want you to give me each of you, not a long say, just one, and I'm going to ask one specific to name one thing, and that is that I think, Ms. Attard, you mentioned that a top-down responsibility chain was important. I want to know if the police chief agrees with that. We should have top-down, and on a university campus, where does the buck stop? Who are we talking about at the top? I just want to know the answer.
I agree that they're in the crowd control situations, yes.
And who is the top?
Well, in my scenario, that would be our chancellor, and beyond that, our president.
The chancellor.
Yes, tactically, chancellor, but also police chief.
Okay, chancellor and the police chief are the responsible people.
I would think both, and transparency.
Thank you very much. With that, we're going to thank our panelists and move on to the next panel. What we've decided to do is that since this is a joint hearing, that each panel will be chaired by one of us, and the next panel will be chaired by Assemblymember Block.
Thank you, Senator Lowenthal. The second panel, if the panelists will please come forward, Mark Yudof, President of the University of California, Charles Robinson, Counsel of the University of California, Dr. Ben Quillian, the Executive Vice Chancellor and Chief Business Officer of the California State University, and Dr. Nate Johnson, Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the California State University. And this panel will discuss, among other things, the following 4 issues. What system-wide and/or statewide programs and policies are in place to address campus demonstrations? Are there system-wide best practices for addressing nonviolent campus demonstrations? In what instances is the use of force authorized, and who makes that determination? And what system-wide activity is being undertaken in response to recent campus incidents? Gentlemen, you may proceed in whatever order you prefer.
Sorry, Chair Block, I would start, and perhaps our General Counsel, Charlie Robinson, could come after me immediately. I actually welcome the opportunity.
Introduce yourself, please.
Mark Udoff, President of the University of California. Assemblymember Block, Senator Lowenthal, and other members actually welcome the opportunity to be here. I want to tell our story, and I believe strongly that universities are a special place for peaceful exchange of different viewpoints. I've taught constitutional law for many years, wrote a book on the First Amendment, although not on the use of force by police, I have to admit that. I take great pride in the richness of the voices on the UC campus. I think the free speech is in the DNA of the university, going back to the free speech movement in the 1960s and the anti-apartheid movement and various movements at the University of California. And we need to provide a robust environment for peaceful discourse, and I intend to do everything in my power to preserve the rights of our students, faculty, and staff to engage in nonviolent protest. Like you, I'm very deeply distressed by the images of University of California students being sprayed with pepper spray at UC Davis and jabbed with batons at UC Berkeley. I, of course, don't ever want to see such pain inflicted on our students. Chancellor Katehi at Davis and Chancellor Bergeno at Berkeley have already initiated reviews of the incidents that occurred on their campuses to see how those situations could have been avoided. I applaud their responses, and I eagerly await the results. The University of California, however, is a single university with 10 campuses, and I think, as a number of members have said, I think it requires a system-wide response. And I've taken a series of steps. You've probably read about them, but I'll go through it. I've convened all 10 chancellors to talk about what the chain of command is in these incidents, whether there are administrators present to observe what is going on, whether we're getting enforcement of policies for the minimal use of force under the circumstances. We discussed all that. We also discussed upholding the health and safety laws and the regulations in a nonviolent protest. At the same time, at the request of Chancellor Katehi, I initiated a thorough review of the UC Davis events, where we all have seen the 15-second video, and where the students seated on the ground were sprayed with pepper spray. I've asked former Los Angeles Police Chief William Bratton to undertake an independent fact-finding of the pepper spray incident. He also led the New York department. He's now head of Kroll Consulting. He conducted a review which has been widely applauded in Los Angeles for being fair-minded. And remember, we have to be fair to the police officers. We need someone who knows something about policing involved. I also took the step of appointing Justice Cruz Reynoso, retired Justice Cruz Reynoso, to head a task force to completely investigate the matter. And the members of that task force are largely appointed by the campus. There are 12 members. 4 were appointed by the Student Association. There are 2 undergrads, 1 grad, 1 law student, I believe. Then we have representatives of the lecturers group and the faculty and the staff and so forth. In addition to that, I appointed a few members. So I'm trying to get the right mix of expertise, but also participation by the Davis community in assessing what went wrong during that confrontation, the pepper spraying incident. Justice Reynoso will have wide sway in his investigation. If he thinks that the Kroll associates have ignored some witnesses, not asked the right questions, not gotten all the documents they should acquire, he has full authority to redirect the Kroll people to investigate whatever he thinks is appropriate. Now, on a separate issue, which is really more in my immediate domain, we need a thorough review of the policies on 10 campuses. And frankly, I think, and General Counsel Robinson can speak to this, they're not uniform. I mean, in general, there's a reasonableness standard, and the ACLU representative talked about there's various meat you can put on that bone, and there's debate about that. But I think at the end of the day, we probably are going to end up with one standard, and that standard should be for all 10 campuses. It probably also should be for the state of California. We should all be in sync with each other, and I do look forward to working with Post or anybody that you tell me we should work for, because I don't think we've kept up. We have these new technologies, and we have tasers and we have pepper sprays, and and one part of me says we got to be real careful and use minimal force all the time, even when someone's engaged in unlawful conduct. But then you have to be very careful that if you only leave the police officers with their blackjacks and their guns or something like that, there has to be less lethal force that can be employed to save human life and to preserve human life. So I don't claim to be an expert, but I have asked General Counsel Robinson and UC Berkeley Law School Dean Christopher Edley. Chris was a former member of the Civil Rights Commission, I think is quite expert on these things, and I think I have two top-notch lawyers. They're going to review all the policies, and maybe we should have police review boards on each campus, and maybe we should have one for the 10 campuses. I want more information on that. I want more thinking. I certainly think we need more definition of when we use force and don't use force and what is permissible. And and I agree we need a chain of command. Now typically, the lieutenant who's on the scene is going to call the shots, or the sergeant, for the very contextual tactical issues. But the tone has to be set at the top for what type of campus we're trying to run. I don't want to micromanage the campuses. But I do think we do have to respond to this extraordinary situation. And we do a lot of policing that doesn't make the newspapers. But I'm not happy about these incidents. We will investigate them. We will be public about it. We will be transparent. And we will try to do what's right. And that's my pledge to you today. Thank you.
Thank you, President Yudof. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you. Assemblymember Block, Senator Lowenthal, and members, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Like President Yudof and many of you, I was saddened by the recent events at UC Davis and UC Berkeley. President Yudof has just described the steps that he and the chancellors have taken to address these specific events and also to review our university policies going forward. I am here today to further describe the system-wide review that Dean Edley of the UC Berkeley Law School and I are undertaking at the President's direction regarding policies governing demonstrations and protests on our campuses. We've already begun this review, and we look forward to providing a full report in March. This review is meant to be prospective in nature. Our goal is to identify best practices that will facilitate robust and peaceful discourse on our campuses, while also protecting the health and safety of our students, faculty, staff, and the general public. The outcome of the review will be specific recommendations that we hope will set the standard for achieving this type of balance. Here is what we know already. The UC system as a whole and individual campuses have in place policies expressly affirming the right of all persons to assemble and speak freely. Our university-wide policy, for example, unambiguously asserts that, quote, all persons may exercise the constitutionally protected rights of free expression, speech, assembly, and worship, close quote. As our policies further reflect, however, expressive activity should not unduly interfere with the functioning of the university or threaten the safety of others on campus. For that reason, the university's policies allow for regulations on the time, place, and manner of speech that are consistent with the First Amendment. At Berkeley, for example, speakers are prohibited from using amplified sound near classrooms in a way that would disrupt the instruction of students. Regarding the use of force by police, the university has required that each campus adopt a policy on this subject, which policy must include documentation and review of all instances of the use of force. Our policies further grant chancellors the authority to delegate responsibilities for such matters as they deem appropriate. Although the policies by the 10 campuses are not identical, They generally permit the use of force by police, including pepper spray and batons, only when and to the extent reasonably necessary under the circumstances. The policies generally afford our officers discretion to make split-second decisions about the appropriate use of force, subject to review procedures depending upon the level of force used. In addition, many use of force policies set out specific requirements governing certain devices, such as batons, pepper spray, tear gas, and tasers. For example, the general orders of the UC San Francisco Police Department state, quote, "Tear gas will only be used in extreme circumstances where a serious danger to life and property exists and all other methods of control or apprehension would be ineffective or more dangerous," close quote. Some campuses also have established rules specifically addressing how the police are to respond to protest activity and or to manage large crowds. Perhaps the most detailed policy has been developed by the UC Berkeley Police Department, though our review is still ongoing. The Berkeley policy requires police to attempt to communicate and coordinate with demonstrators in advance in order to facilitate nonviolent and non-disruptive protests. At UC San Diego, the organizers of student demonstrations are required to appoint monitors. These monitors are responsible for maintaining reasonable order and coordinating with the Office of Student Affairs to ensure health and safety. Regarding the review that by Dean Edley and me, we intend to conduct an extensive study into how the existing policies on use of force and protests are understood and actually used on our campuses. We will interview students, faculty, staff, and administrators, and will also look beyond the UC system to learn the approaches adopted by other universities and law enforcement agencies. We will solicit the views of academics, experts on law enforcement, and others. And the people on your first panel, I think, are now on my list to talk to. Our report will strive to identify a set of best practices for our campuses and our police departments going forward. Specifically, we will examine how campus officials should make decisions regarding protests. Who should decide how to respond to violations of campus speech rules? Who should decide whether to escalate the level of response? How should the campus administration communicate and coordinate with police officials? We will also explore how campus police departments should approach demonstrations. How much discretion should individual officers have to decide whether to use force in response to peaceful demonstrations? How should officers be supervised during operations involving demonstrations? What advanced planning should campus police departments engage in before responding to protests? Finally, we will focus on the training of administration officials and police officers. How should administrators be trained on campus policies, First Amendment principles, and the needs of law enforcement? And how should police officers be trained on use of force, conflict resolution, and crowd management? The answers to these questions will allow us to identify which policies work, which need to be scrapped, and how the University of California should address this crucial issue in the future. Our recommendations will be informed by best practices from both inside and outside the university. We look forward to this opportunity to improve our policies on peaceful demonstrations and the use of force by police. That concludes my remarks, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. We'll hold our questions until the entire panel is finished. At this point, we'll hear from the CSU, Vice Chancellor Quillian.
Quillian, thank you. My name is Benjamin Quillian. I'm Executive Vice Chancellor and Chief Financial Officer for the California State University. Chancellor Reed sends his regrets for not being able to attend today's hearing. He had an unavoidable schedule conflict and extends his apologies. The matter before us today is extremely important. As the Executive Vice Chancellor and Chief Financial Officer, risk management and public safety report to me. I take very seriously the rights of individuals engaged in peaceful demonstrations. I also recognize the responsibility to protect state property and ensure the welfare and safety of our students, faculty, and staff. In preparation for this hearing, Dr. Nathan Johnson here with me, the CSU Chief Law Enforcement Officer, and I have been personally reviewing campus and system-wide policies, giving particular attention to the guidelines on the use of force and how appropriate force options are to be determined. No policy can predict every situation a peace officer may encounter in the field, and officers must be trusted to exercise well-reasoned discretion in determining the appropriate use of force in each situation. However, we believe, and it is stated in our policies, that the ultimate objective of every law enforcement encounter is to maximize safety and, to the extent possible, avoid personal injury to all involved. The CSU officers are trained to consider several factors in determining if any level of force is deemed necessary. First and foremost are the rights of those engaged in campus demonstrations. Some of the other factors include the type of conduct being confronted, that is, whether it is threatening, violent, or passive. The characteristics of those being confronted, such as age, size, influence of drugs or alcohol, or mental capacity. Whether those being confronted are armed. Whether there is a potential for injury to those being confronted or those in the area or the officers themselves. Various degrees of force exist and may be necessary in a given situation. CSU officers are trained to use only that degree of force that is reasonable under the circumstances to accomplish the legitimate law enforcement purpose in accordance with legal guidelines and university policies. Response options may range from professional presence to the use of force. By policy, the use of force options should be employed only when it is necessary to defend against aggression or conduct an arrest. Force is to be used only when there is an immediate threat of violence, or active resistance. We have provided this committee with the technical letter to campus police chiefs. That letter spells out the areas to be included in campus policies. And one of those areas is the use of force. Also included in the materials forwarded to the committee is a memorandum to the campus presidents. That memorandum sets forth the reporting requirements for major incidents. In addition, we included select portions from the Critical Response Unit Operations Manual. The Critical Response Unit is often called CREW, and we have identified those areas that would be most relevant to the topic today. Chapter 1 outlines the purpose of the CREW. Chapter 2 shows clearly the chain of command. Chapter 3 explains the command system. Chapter 4 sets forth the procedures for calling out the CREW. And Chapter 5 gives details on the policy and guidelines for the use of force. We did not include Chapters 6 through 11 and Chapters 13 through 16, either because they contain specific tactical information or were not particularly relevant to the issues addressed today. Chapter 12, however, was included. It addresses the evaluation and updating of CREW policies and procedures. I have directed Dr. Johnson here to conduct a comprehensive review of the system-wide police policies. I have also contacted the CSU internal auditor and requested an audit of campus policies to ensure full compliance with the technical letter issued to the campus police chiefs. In closing, I have to say that the CSU is proud of the performance of its police officers. They have been successful in honoring the rights of campus demonstrators, protecting state property, and maintaining the welfare of our students, faculty, and staff. I would now like for Dr. Johnson to offer his remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Quillian. Dr. Johnson, during your remarks, if you could refer specifically to the Board of Trustees confrontation recently, along with whatever else you plan to say, that'd be appreciated.
Yes, I will try to answer a few of your anticipated questions in my brief remarks.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for having me. It's good to see some of you again and to see others for the first time. Like many college and university campuses, of course, throughout the country, the CSU has had its share of protests and demonstrations. We pride ourselves on providing a safe environment during such demonstrations and protecting the rights of all parties, including the demonstrators, and avoiding physical conflicts whenever possible. We do this by a variety of ways, including meeting with people, usually the group coordinators ahead of time, discussing various roles and responsibilities and expectations of law enforcement and what they hope to do and how we can help them accomplish that. And we also try to remain flexible in our policies and guidelines. We understand that every law is written under a letter of the law and also the spirit of the law, and we try to go with the intent of the spirit of the law whenever possible. Our officers are fully trained, as you know, through one of the certified post academies. They sit side by side with city, state, and county officers, and they receive additional training as well in advanced campus law enforcement, crime prevention training, as well as sensitivity training through the Wiesenthal Museum of Tolerance. In 1993, the CSU created a special team of officers called the Crew Unit, a Critical Response Unit. And the intent of this group was to respond to the various campuses, to train officers very well, discipline officers who would respond to the various campuses to handle large-scale demonstrations and protests, and to create a system of policies and protocols that were standard that could be applied throughout the state. And so far, I think we've done a pretty good job of that. These plans are normally shared. In addition to those plans, we create individual event plans as well based on circumstances we receive about various events that are happening throughout the state. And these plans are normally shared with local law enforcement for coordination and logistical reasons. In addition to that, we share some of these plans with on-campus management as well. We share them with public affairs, as it was pointed out earlier, and also with student affairs personnel. If force is used, a decision is normally made by the incident commander in consultation with senior management. We assess the situation and make the best decision at the time. And if we were to move for some kind of arrest, it usually is because someone is actually destroying property or whether or not we feel that someone's life or safety is being threatened. Currently, we are in the process of reviewing a statewide manual and ensuring that campuses have clear direction on handling demonstrations in the future. Each campus has its own set of use of force policy, critical incident policies. We are reviewing those as well to make sure they are consistent with statewide guidelines. It was mentioned earlier about the Board of Trustees meeting and the use of pepper spray and what may have happened at that meeting. Our meeting lasts for about a day and a half typically, and we made it through about 90% of that meeting before our agitators, some of the people started becoming agitators. At one point, we had to escort that group out of the building, which we did. They commenced with chanting and things of that nature, and someone yelled, "Take the building." And the large mob approached us in the front and attempted to take over the building, occupy the building, throwing themselves at us and spraying officers with pepper spray. One officer did return a 3-second spray of pepper spray at one of the agitators who was spraying the officers. And during that time, those officers stood the line, they stood fast, and they took beatings to the head, they took lacerations to the temple. One officer received major lacerations to the arm, had to get stitches, and so forth. Eventually, we had to call in the Long Beach Police Department, who was standing by in riot gear, who came and pushed the crowd back so our officers can fall back and don their safety gear, in which they did. The situation was quickly brought under control once we had a full team of people back on the front line with protective equipment. Unfortunately, I had a conversation with several students following that, and they were a little disheartened that their message was taken off track because of the agitators. Unfortunately, as I explained to them, 2 of my daughters attend CSU campus. I pay tuition like they do, and most of us are very sensitive to the issues as well, and we support them in their effort. But many of these folks who started this problem were not our students. They were members of Occupy groups, they were members of Refund California and other groups who were there, who was agitating, and unfortunately left students to kind of fend for themselves once the problem broke out. That being said, I think the campus law enforcement team has been very professional. We have a question was raised earlier about statistics. We have about 1 officer per 1,000 people. We have about 460 sworn officers for about 460,000 people. Not a lot of police officers for the number of size of our community. I think for the most part, I think we've done a pretty good job over the years in keeping these kind of conflicts to a bare minimum. Thank you.
May I add just a brief comment related to Dr. Johnson's comments? We meet, we being the Chancellor, myself, and Dr. Johnson meet before each board meeting to discuss how we are going to address issues that may arise. One of the things that the Chancellor always makes it clear is that he does not want riot gear placed on our police officers at the beginning, only as necessary. We believe strongly that the use of riot gear can sometimes suggest that we want a confrontation, and we are reluctant to use the riot gear, as Dr. Johnson pointed out.
Okay, thank you, panel. I'll have a couple questions, and I'll be recognizing other members of the committee. First, for President Yudof, a question about the task force. I'm sure they're going to be looking into many things. One issue that's come up at the UC and also at CSU is the use of pepper spray on campus. And I would just ask if you could ask the task force to look at the frequency of pepper spray being used on campus, and also if there is any risk assessment in terms of pepper spray and the impact it might have on students or others who are affected long term. And if there is such a study, maybe your task force could just point out what's already been done. If not, perhaps the UC could do such a study. But that's something I would personally be very interested in seeing.
Well, Assembly Member, I think I certainly can ask the Reynoso Task Force to investigate previous uses of pepper spray or other non-lethal but nonetheless uses of force on that campus. I think I'd ask Dean Edley and the General Counsel to look across the 10 campuses. My impression is it's not that frequent because I try to keep tabs. I mean, I'm not too thrilled when this occurs on any of our campuses. So I would say that I have not personally looked at the studies. I have been assured by the police authorities that you wash your face and in a couple of hours you're okay. But I think that's a very good point. Let's see what empirical research is out there, and if we don't have it, let's do it ourselves. We have a research capacity at the university. We'll do it. I think it's a good idea.
Thank you very much. Okay, first we have Assemblywoman Olson.
Appreciate your comments today. Can you speak to when the results of the various investigations are expected to come in and what actions have been taken in the meantime?
The Davis investigation, the first report from the Kroll Group is due in early January, approximately 30 days. I mean, you need to interview a whole range of witnesses, and remember, Assembly Member, they don't have subpoena power and so forth. I mean, it's not a legislative body, it's not a judicial body, so it's going to take some time. And but in any event, 30 days is the deadline for them, and then that report then goes to the task force led by Justice Reynoso, and I expect, within weeks after that, maybe a month after that, we would have the report. We have to take the time to do it right. We just can't say guilty, guilty, guilty. We need to know what exactly happened, who did what wrong, how far up the line the responsibility goes. I mean, so it's going to take a little time. I would just urge a little bit of patience. The review by the General Counsel and by Dean Edley probably be a 3-month review because, frankly, I want to know what the best practices are in New England and in the Midwest and whether Michigan has a better set of policies for dealing with non-lethal force. I think we need to do a lot of homework to establish best practices. But I do think inevitably there'll be a centralization process. I don't know why. This is one area where diversity probably is not the rule of thumb. That, as far as I know, when I taught the First Amendment, it was the same in all 50 states. And so I think, at that level, we probably need to have some stronger system-wide policies.
I understand why we want to be patient and take our time to come up with a report that you're, for example, working on that will be prospective and providing new policies and guidelines. But it isn't clear to me why it would take so long to investigate the actions that did take place on UC Davis on November 8th. And, 30 days, that's reasonable. But have any actions been taken in the meantime other than speeches to ensure students of their safety and to make sure that if there were mistakes that were made, that will not be tolerated
Well,
in the
I brought
future?
the chancellors together. I said that, first, I want the chain of command fixed if it's not already fixed. That is, you need to know what's going on, and your vice chancellor and your police chief and your captains and lieutenants right on down the line. Second, I don't want to see any, when the police are deployed, I want observers. I want not only student observers, I want administrative observers to be there. And third, I said, look at what happened. I don't want this to happen anywhere else. I want to make sure that we have a proportional response, and that the response is reasonable, and that so those are the steps we've taken. I mean, I brought them all together and sort of, frankly, read the Riot Act and sent some pieces of paper out. I couldn't resolve all the issues, but I thought at the very least we need to make sure that there are observers and the right chain of command and student monitors and and more transparency. So that's what I did.
Thank you, Ms. Olson. Every committee member does want to ask a question, so we will just go through the whole panel. I would ask in each time that each member keep their questions kind of brief and to the point, and that the answers also be brief and to the point. With that, Senator Huff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. President Yudof, you commented about doing this review. We've all seen the 15-second tape recently. There's been a 30-minute tape released. Is that and other snippets that are available from different sources all going to be used in this review?
Yes, sir, it will. I've been a lawyer a long time, and as they say, no matter how thin a pancake gets, there are always two sides to it. And maybe it's pretty thin in this case, but, the police officers, they're entitled to due process, right? And the police chief, and certainly the chancellor, and so forth, and certainly the students. I mean, their voices need to be heard, so yes.
Okay, good. For the council, what's the definition of a peaceful assembly?
Well, that's one of the things that we're currently looking at. A number of the policies currently identify various types of, or classify various types of activity. And so I've seen policies that talk about active resistance versus passive resistance versus lethal or potentially lethal or threatening conduct. And so different campuses define activities in different ways.
And on this campus, what constitutes active resistance?
You're referring to the Davis campus?
Yes.
I believe active resistance can include such things as tensing, linking arms in a manner that may obstruct the movement of police officers, has been defined on some of our campuses as active resistance. And I believe that's the case at Davis, but I haven't really committed all of the policies to memory. Yeah.
And maybe we'll get more on that later on. And maybe that's part of the review as you implement system-wide policies. And I guess that begs a question, when is that line crossed? Certainly it depends on an officer to make some kind of assessment. When that is going to happen, and maybe this is more for President Yudof, is that a decision that's made at a higher level, or is it left to the officer on the scene?
Well, I think you're better experts than I am in your first panel, frankly, this morning. But
well,
I would
the buck
say
stops on your desk.
I mean, you need overall direction by the high-level administrators. But my own judgment would be, for whatever it's worth, it's probably the lieutenants, the sergeants, and the captains that would have to assess, well, how risky is this situation? Is the building going to be invaded and taken over, and the meeting shut down? And so it's not made, I would say, not by one officer at a time, but there obviously is a factual context. The First Amendment context doesn't change, but obviously, I mean, most of the rules, if you look at cases like the Tinker case, they talk about material and substantial disruption. I mean, they're legal rules, but they're fact-oriented legal rules. What is reasonable? What is a defensive measure? So there always is going to be some discretion, but I don't think you want to do it one officer at a time. I think it has to be at a command level.
Okay. And I guess it begs the question. It sounds like the UC's policies were violated, that according to the definitions there, and I know you said you need to review that. UCLA, I know it's the case because there's something written on it as far as locking arms, constitutes a legal resistance. So it sort of begs the question, is the use of force ever justified when it's peaceful?
And that's certainly something that we need to take a look at. Again, I've seen policies that after classifying the type of response by students classifies the type of response that may be appropriate for that particular activity. And it may very well be that we conclude ultimately that active resistance or passive resistance shouldn't be subject to what has been characterized as intermediate force by the police. Chemical agents are typically viewed to be intermediate force. So that may be an outcome of the review. Again, I need to see what best practices are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you
I'll
for
have
your
some more
question,
questions
Senator.
for the specific at UC Davis that would probably be more appropriate than these.
Appreciate it. We'll move then to Assemblywoman Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question, but wanted to confirm with Mr. Robinson about your completion date for this process that you're going to go through. And then a follow-up question to that is, how are you going to be transparent in this process? We've talked somewhat about civilian reviews, what sort of a civilian review type of transparency.
We expect to have our final report and recommendations ready by March 1. In the course of developing the report, we will be interviewing many people, not only outside the university, but we will be conferring with students, with faculty, with staff, with administrators. There will be a lot of opportunity for input. I think that our end product will likely be the beginning of yet another process. We'll make recommendations, but to the extent that those recommendations then need to be implemented into actual policy language or changes, I imagine, as is typical at UC, that we will then have processes that follow on for implementation of recommendations. But that will be certainly very open and transparent.
Let me, if I might add to that, typically, like we did a rule change after the Rutgers incident on privacy policies, after the racial incident, we did a couple of rule changes on racist behavior on campus and when it was punishable. We circulate that to the campuses, including the student association, the faculty, the staff, and so forth. And only when it's sort of like a comment period for an administrative agency, only when we get comments back, and then we might change the rules in the light of the comments, only then do we officially promulgate it.
And is this done in sort of an open meeting where others can observe and see, or is it?
Well, typically, I mean, we'd be open to that, but typically we would send it to the student association and the 10 campus student body presidents and the faculty, and then they could call their meetings of their faculty senates, of the student bodies. In other words, it's completely open. But from Oakland, we don't normally call the meetings on the campuses. They would call their own meetings, and we would offer to send representatives to explain what we did, why we did it. But the whole process is open. We certainly would be released to the media and everyone else the proposed rules. And then the idea is that they would convene their own groups and then tell us what they think about these policies.
But in terms of interviewing, police officers, students, it's sort of in silos, and how everyone sort of shares and listens to and understands the other conversations.
To some extent, we are leaving it to the various constituencies how they think it would be best for us to gather the information. So, for example, we have met with the student regents who have agreed to assist us in working with the Student Association, the Council of Student Presidents, and my understanding is there may be some telephone calls, conference calls, there may be town hall meetings, but to some extent we're leaving it to the constituents to make some decisions about how they believe it would be best for us to gather the information.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee. Move on to Assemblywoman Yamada.
Thank you, Mr. Block. Well, following up a little bit on what Assemblymember Brownlee just raised, I guess I've counted no less than 5 or 6 separate investigations going on for this series of incidents. And I think, we too, if I may be so bold to speak for this panel in its entirety, I think would appreciate some more definitive, like, scheduling of when we could expect there are 5 or 6 processes going on, and still I believe the Attorney General herself may be reviewing whether or not the request from the Chancellor of UC Davis to our local district attorney who has since referred it upstairs, is going forward. So I find the whole, frankly, the number of investigations that are going on, while, they're all welcome, it's kind of interesting to me in the context of, use of force in our general community at times. I'm not sure how much attention is paid to some of these other situations that we are facing. But I do have one specific question for Dr. Udoff, and that is, earlier in your testimony you referenced that one of the outcomes you hope to see is sort of a statewide standard across the UC campuses, and I'm assuming the CSUs very similarly. But, this one-size-fits-all standard, do you think that is going to work given the range of the campuses that we have? There's got to be some flexibility, perhaps, built into these kinds of responses, or not?
Well, what I think is, and I think you heard this from the first panel, I think we can have the same rules on use of what we're calling intermediate force. And I don't know why they would vary from campus to campus. Now, the context may well vary, and I think we have a overriding obligation to protect our students, including those who are demonstrating. So, I feel a sort of maybe a stronger sense of responsibility that we should have for the students who are entrusted to us in a way. So there may be, variations, and Merced, the chancellor sent out hot chocolate. That seemed to work pretty well with the occupiers. I got to get in line for that myself. But so there may be contextual differences, but, just like the Supreme Court's jurisprudence on the First Amendment applies nationwide, whether in Alaska, Hawaii, or California or Pennsylvania, I think the rule structure should be the same, but there may be differences in terms of the size of the student body, the topography of the campus. I don't really know what I'm talking about, but there are differences that you might have to take into account.
Well, and one very last question to the first panel was, what should the chain of command be? We heard from the first panel, but my understanding at present, if I'm not mistaken, is that the chancellors are really not the first line. They report, the police chief in an incident command situation is reporting to some vice chancellor instead of to the chancellor.
I think that's right. We may need to look at that more carefully.
Because that was as a result of Virginia Tech. We saw that in Oakland in the mayor's situation. The question is, at what point in the chain of command, because typically a chancellor is not going to make the tactical decision. Now, I think it's their responsibility to say, look, you may not want to move these occupiers out at all because it's just too confrontational. Sometimes the best thing to do is to waive the rules for a while. Or you may want to say, I don't want you to carry batons. That happened at UCLA. No police officer actually carried a baton when the Occupy movement was moved out. So I think some things can be made at the top, but I think ultimately, I think it's the on-the-scene commanders and the police chief that are the first line. Then they report to a vice chancellor, typically, who's more of an administrator. They're not paid for. They're really not trained, is what I want to say per se. Maybe they should be, but the chancellor should give overall direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yamada. Assemblyman Fong.
Thank you. This is a question for President Udoff. I commend your efforts to appoint an outside investigator. However, my concern is that there's a conflict of interest in appointing the Kroll Security Group, who's a major contractor for the UC. Why not go with someone else?
Well, I don't agree with that. There is no conflict. I'm a lawyer. There is zero conflict here. This is an outfit that, when we had threats to our animal researchers at UCLA and some other place, help us provide security. This is an outfit we have to do criminal background checks for people who deliver services in hospital, who deliver care to children and stuff like that. I don't see any conflict. They delivered some services. They have the expertise. The chief has a splendid record, including in Los Angeles, in ferreting out police misbehavior. It will be subject to the direction of Justice Reynoso, so I don't agree with that observation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fong. Assemblywoman Skinner.
Thank you, and panelists, I appreciate all of your comments, and I just wanted to indicate to President Udoff, I found that not only your remarks today, but your immediate response to the state, to the campus community around actions you were going to take are refreshing. And I am both very optimistic and confident that there will be put into place, both on the campuses and system-wide, some procedures and fixes to line of command and such so that these things can be minimized. I certainly am not going to sit here and indicate that I think none of us, that any circumstance we can ever, we would of course hope to fully prevent, though we know things can happen. But I find it very refreshing, the taking of responsibility and the willingness to look at how to repair these things. And I say that because in the 70s, I arrived on the UC Berkeley campus in the early 70s. From that point till the late 80s, I never saw any system-wide president take such responsibility. So I really appreciate it. I will also say that during that time, those who remember the kind of circumstance at Cal during the early 70s, there was quite a lot of whether and under the terms then it was considered excessive force, who knows, but basically you protested at your peril. You were routinely tear-gassed, routinely hit with batons, routinely had your wrists and arm wrenched if you were cuffed, you name it. So if anyone who follows the campus would have noted that there was a period of time from mid to late 70s where there was very little protest activity, and much of it because the students were intimidated. The students were, most of us, I don't mean me as a student, but people in general don't usually very voluntarily throw themselves in harm's way. So while it is not in the interest or business of CSU, UC, or anybody to necessarily encourage protests and disruptions, we certainly cannot be in the business of actively repressing them. So I am very hopeful and really appreciate. Now, another comment I wanted to make regarding Dr. Johnson, your comments. You're correct that in many times on the campus, the agitators or the people that cause perhaps more disruption may not be actual staff or students on the campus. But I think that we face that because our campuses are public property and not fully, but in many of the areas, we're going to just face that. That is just a reality. We're going to have community people on campus as well as students. We're going to have students and community people and disruptions in the communities. And so I feel that that's another very strong point for why our policies, as much as possible, need to be consistent. Our policing policies in communities or on campus, because we can't predict who the people are in either location. And as a member of the Public Safety Committee, I will be working with our chair in the Assembly to look at what if we need to do, because certainly the focus of this hearing is the incidents on campus, but as we know, in the last couple of months, there have been serious incidents in our communities of what some people might consider excessive force. And again, I'm not trying to make the judgment yet, because obviously police reviews and others help us determine that. But I think that our police in general do respond to practices. If practices emerge, if the dominant practice becomes pepper spray or the dominant forces start to use it. And I think that's something that we really want to step back and look at. Is that what we want to be moving towards?
Ms. Skinner?
Yes.
Are there any
I did a
questions?
question. True.
Yeah,
I only wanted to ask whether if our own CSU and UC administrators feel that crowd control training of the police is adequate.
Well, I can comment that from the critical response unit, since that unit falls under my domain, they practice and train 3 to 4 times a year, mid-state. They all come together to discuss the latest trends and techniques and things of that nature. And I think they're very well trained, and I definitely concur with your comments. I know that I've been in law enforcement now for about 31 years, a combination of community college policing, private, municipal, and the state system since '99. During my tenure at Sonoma State University, I chaired the Sonoma County Law Enforcement Chiefs Association. and we had roughly about 20 protocols that we shared throughout the entire county that every agency signed off on. And I know that many of our campuses in their own counties fall under that same auspices of sharing protocols that on issues that would affect all of them.
Thank you. Senator Portantino.
Yes. I want to echo the sentiment that there has been a clear acknowledgement that something went wrong and an effort to try to fix it. And I think that is refreshing and welcome, because something went wrong and kids were hurt, and we can't have that. So I definitely appreciate an earnest effort there. I do want to follow up on Ms. Brownlee's transparency issue, because I think there's a difference between circulating draft documents to internal organizations and having a noticed public meeting to review that work product. And that